Star Wars Young Jedi Knights Shadow Academy Chapter 14. Lowy crouched atop the sleeping platform in his own cell, back pressed into the corner, shaggy knees drawn up to his chest. He wallowed in abject misery and self-recrimination. Occasionally he let out a groan. How could he been so stupid? He had let the riptide of Brachus's teaching draw him further and further into his sea of anger until he had been immersed in it, swept away by the current. Jason had not given in, and seductive as Brachus's teachings were, Lowy refused to think of him as Master Brachus. Jaina had not succumbed to them either. She had merely stood up and spoken for what she believed. A growl of self-reproach rumbled deep in his throat. He alone, who had always prided himself on his thoughtfulness, on his dedication to study and to learning, to understanding, had allowed himself to be influenced by poisonous teachings. He would have to be more careful in the future, resist, block out the words. If Jaina and Jason could stay strong, then so could Lowy. Jaina had not given up. She had said she had a plan, and he needed to be ready to do his part when the time came to escape. Lowy drew comfort from the thought of his friend's strength. He could resist giving in to his anger. He pounded a furry fist against the wall at his side and bellowed his defiance. He would resist. As if response to his challenge, the door slid open and two stormtroopers stepped in, followed by Timothy Kai. Lowy wrinkled his nose, noting something else that had encountered his room uninvited, the unpleasant smell that hung about them, an odor of darkness. The stormtroopers each carried an activated stun wand, and Lloyd guessed they expected him to cause further trouble. "You will stand," Timothy Kai said. Lloyd wondered whether he dared resist. A prod from one of the stormtroopers' stun wands answered the question for him. Timothy Kai's violet gaze raked up and down Lowy for a moment, and then she blew out a short breath, as if about to start a difficult task that she had set herself. "You are not yet skilled in the ways of the Force," she said, not unkindly. "Yet you have capacity for great anger." She nodded with approval. "This is your greatest strength, and I will teach you now to draw from that anger, to bring forth your full power in the Force. You will be surprised at how it will accelerate your learning." She turned to the stormtroopers. "Remove his belt." Lowy put a protective hand to the glossy braids that encircled his waist and crossed over his shoulder. He had risked his life to acquire these fibers from the Siren plant as part of his rites of passage into Wookiee adulthood. Then he had painstakingly wove them into a belt that symbolized his independence and self-reliance. He opened his mouth to snarl an angry objection, but then stopped short, realizing this was exactly the response Timothy Kai hoped for, to goad him into anger. He would not be fooled so easily this time. He stood resolute and passive while the stormtroopers removed the precious belt. She motioned for him to precede her from the room. One of the stormtroopers administered an encouraging prod. Timothy Kai smiles mocked Lowy. "Yes, young Wookiee, your anger should be your greatest strength." They led him to a large, unfurnished chamber. Bright orange and red light glared down from unfiltered glow panels set into the ceiling. The chilled air stank of metal and sweat. When the door slid shut with a hiss and a clang, Lowy looked around. He was completely alone. Lobaka stood waiting for what seemed like hours, alert, prepared for whatever Timothy Kai might use to provoke him. His golden eyes roved the blank walls with suspicion. Nothing happened. As he waited, the lights in the room began to glow brighter. The air turned cooler. Finally, he sat down with his back pressed to one wall, still wary, still watching. Nothing. After a long time, Lowy straightened up with a jerk, realizing that he had been about to doze off. He eyed the walls again, looking for any changes, and found himself wishing even for the annoying company of EMTD to keep him awake and to keep him company. Sound exploded in Lowy's head, high-pitched and excruciating, waking him from fitful sleep. Garish lights flashed overhead, blinding in their intensity. Lois sprang to his feet. Trying to focus his eyes, he looked around for the source of the siren and pressed his hands over his ears, groaning in pain. But he could not block out the sound that sliced into his brain as a laser would slice into soft wood. Without warning, all sound ceased, leaving a vacuum of silence. The glow panels stabilized, returning to their former level of brightness. Timothy Kai's face appeared from behind a broad, transparent steel panel in the wall that Loie had not noticed before. Still groggy from his uninterrupted sleep, Loie threw himself against the panel in frustration. Timothy Kai's pleased chuckle sobered him instantly. "A fine start," she said. Loie backed into the center of a room and sat down, wrapping his long hairy arms around his legs, afraid to make any further response lest he lose his temper again. Her taunting voice echoed through the empty chamber. "Oh, we are far from finished with your lesson, Wookiee. You will stand." Loie pressed his forehead to his knees, refusing to look at her, refusing to move. "Ah," the voice continued, "perhaps it is for the best. The fire of your anger will burn the brighter the more fuel I add." The high-pitched sound drilled into his brain again, and flashing lights assaulted his eyes. Loie concentrated, focused his mind inside himself. He mutely endured. The lights and sound ceased as a heavy black object fell from an access hatch into the floor behind him. Deep in concentration, Loie didn't flinch, but he looked up to see what it was. "This is a sonic generator," Timothy Kai's rich, deep voice announced. "It produces the lovely music you've been enjoying today." An undercurrent of cruel amusement rippled through her words. "It contains the high-intensity strobe relay for the grow panels. To complete your lesson for the day, all you need to do is destroy the sonic generator." Loie looked at the boxy object. It measured less than a meter or two aside. It was made of a dull, burnished metal with rounded edges and corners, and had no handhold whatsoever. He reached for it. "Rest assured," Kai's voice came again. "Even a full-grown Wookiee cannot lift it without using the Force." Loie tried to heft the object, but he found she was correct. He closed his eyes and concentrated, drawing on the Force, and tried again. The generator hardly budged. Loie shook his head in confusion. The weight itself, or the object's size, should not have mattered, he told himself. Perhaps he reasoned he was just too tired. Or perhaps Timothy Kai was using the Force to hold it down. "Think, my young Jedi," Timothy Kai chided. "You cannot expect to lift the heaviest object with your weakest muscles." Lights flashed again, and a dangerous sound pierced his ears, but only for a moment. "Do not keep your anger pent up," Timothy Kai's voice continued, as if there had been no interruption. "You must use it, release it. Only then can you set yourself free." Loie recognized what she was doing, and the knowledge gave him strength. He closed his eyes, drew a deep breath, and concentrated, prepared to resist the lights and sound. But he was not prepared for what followed. From all sides, jets of icy water exploded from the walls, buffeting him with bruising force. He was drenched and shivering, but still the high-pressure streams pummeled him, invading him. The prying liquid forced itself up under his eyelids, inside his ears and mouth, and streamed down his body, chilling him to the bone. As expectantly as it had begun, the watery attack ended. Shuddered convulsively from the cold, Loie looked down to find himself ankle-deep in water that was barely warmer than a glacial runoff. Anger welled up within him, but he suppressed it, let it flow out of him as the water had stemmed down his body. He tried again to shift the sonic generator again, but to no avail. As if Loie's effort had triggered it, the sonic generator began a fresh assault on his senses, strobing the glow panels and flooding the room with high-pitched wailing until Loie feared he would drown in it. Instead, he concentrated on thoughts of his friends Jason and Jaina. He would be strong. With the generator paused, more fits of freezing water pounded at him from all sides. How long these tortures alternated, Loie could not say. For a time, he seemed his life had always been a litany of lights, sound, water, lights, sound, water, and still he did not give in to his anger. By the time Timothy Kai spoke to him again, he was curled into a tight, freezing ball of soggy misery, perched directly on the sonic generator in an effort to bring feeling back to his numb legs and feet. You have the power within you to end your ordeal, her voice said in mock pity. Alas, young Jedi, fortitude is only admirable when it gains you something. Lowy did not raise his head or acknowledge her words. You cannot help yourself this way. You cannot help your friends. Your friends have already learned the truth of my words, she went on. Lowy's head snapped up, and she voiced a growl of disbelief. Ah, but it's true, she said, a note of encouragement in her voice. Would you like to see them? Before he could utter a bark of agreement, a pair of holographic images spun in the air before his eyes. One showed Jason wielding a lightsaber, a look of fierce enjoyment lighting his young features. The other, Jaina, used the Force to toss aside heavy objects, her head thrown back with a challenging grin. Lowy reached toward the luminescent images with a yelp of stunned disbelief and fell face first into the icy water that covered the floor. He hauled himself back to his feet, and the sonic generator resumed its torturous whine. From deep within him, horror mixed with rage and a sense of betrayal, fanning the embers that smoldered for so long. Flames of anger sprang up inside him, warming him with their undeniable heat, rising higher and higher until they burst from his throat in a howl of fury, and he knew no more. Lowy woke to a restful darkness back in his own cell. The room was warm, and he lay on a sleeping platform covered with a soft blanket. His muscles ached, but he felt well rested. He moved a hand to his waist and found he was once again wearing his webbed belt. The voice of Timothy Kai spoke next to him. Lowy was not surprised to find the tall, dark-haired Night Sister standing beside him. In the dim light of the cell's glow panels, he saw she held an irregular-shaped metal object. You have done well, young Wookiee, she said. Lowy gave a sad moan as the memory of what he had done flooded back to him. With your anger, you succeeded beyond my highest expectations, Timothy Kai said, looking at him with obvious pride. As a reward, I've brought back your droid. Lowy's mind faltered with confusion. Should he feel proud of what he'd done? Should he be ashamed? He received EMTD from Timothy Kai's hands with relief and clipped the little droid on his custom place at his belt. You will make a fine Jedi, Timothy Kai said. She smiled conspiratorially. After you unleashed your anger, we were unable to even repair the sonic generator, as we have done every time before. And then she swept out of the room, leaving him to his thoughts. Lowy stood and groaned as his muscles refused to cooperate, and he slumped back into the sleeping platform. Well, if you ask my opinion, EMTD's thin voice piped, you caused a great deal of your own pain through your needless resistance. Lobaka growled a surprised reply. Who asked me? EMTD said. Well, I don't know why you should be so upset. After all, you're here at the Shadow Academy to learn. Why, you're very fortunate they've taken an interest in you. The Imperials are very perceptive, you know. So perceptive, in fact, that they saw my own potential and have been included me in their plans. I'm most honored.
Oh no, they
With an uncomfortable suspicion, Lowy barked a question. Wrong with me? EMTD asked. Why, nothing. Quite the contrary. As an expression of their complete confidence in me, Brackus and Timothy Kai have had my programming enhanced. I feel much better now than I ever have. I'm to be an integral part of your instruction here. You must realize that they have only your best interest at heart. The Empire is your friend. Lowy made a thoughtful sound as if accepting EMTD's words and then reached down to switch the little droid off. His head had suddenly become clear. EMTD's words had crystallized something in his mind. He might have given in, but he had not given up. And he knew, if he knew anything about Jason and Jaina, the same was true for them. At least that's what he would have to hope.